the Shabbat week of Parshat B'Shalach, which happens to be this Shabbat coming over here. So it happens to be there's a huge Segulot, to say a chapter within regards to Parshat HaMann, it's also called, which we're going to state over in about maybe 5 or 10 minutes approximately. And there's many different connotations, many different history within regards to why is it important to do it. So we're going to explore about different kinds of Segulot, which also provides for good wealth. They say that it's good if one says this specific tefillah, there would be it's a tefillah for parnasa in of itself. It's a prayer for good wealth. And sometimes we could say that parnasa, how important it is that one's going to be wealthy, they're going to have a lot of sustenance and so on and so forth. But sometimes there should be a blessing in the money you get. Even if it's a small amount of money, there should be a blessing in that, let's just say, that potency of the money that one actually recites. So we are going to actually speak about the Segula in of itself. We just want to give an introduction over here within regards to the Parshat B'Shalach, the Minhag. We're going to recite it over, and we're going to talk about other tips of to become wealthy over here. There was an excellent article by Rabbi Yair Hoffman, if I'm not mistaken, from the 5T JT. I think it was actually quoted over in Yeshiva World News a while ago, and obviously there's various different sugulot, different merits, let's just say, to increase our wealth. Now the famous rabbi, someone named the Chatam Sofer, he would actually mention a number of them. He would have a book called the Segulat HaSofer. This book was. Now the Chatam Sofer recommend a very simple one, for example, just making a minyan, for example, having a quorum of 10 people. That would be featured very much on page 36 of the book. Also, not to eat until one learns Torah that day. That's another one of the Segulot. I think that's on page 33 over there. And talks about the need for a constant flow of shefa, abundance. One thing he would actually state is to learn Hilchot Shabbat, the laws within regards to Shabbat, in depth. And to daven in a synagogue. Obviously, these are natural things. But when's the best day to pursue wealth or parnasa, money in of itself? Tuesdays and Wednesdays, he states. So we happen to be on a Tuesday already over here. That's on page 35. Another tip of his is the mitzvah of sukkah, to prepare one for, this will help with regards for success in all food-related ventures. But what does happen to be today at the time of recording? Today happens to be a Tuesday, and it's a Tuesday of Parshat B'Shalach. So there's a famous custom that many people would have, a minhag, within regards to reciting Parshat HaMann. So it's a very popular, let's say, wealth-building segula over here, which is happening on this specific day, where people will be reciting this parsha, this portion, talking about the man, especially before the sun sets in of itself. And very, very interesting. They say the latter day performance of this minhag is to recite on Tuesday of Parshat B'Shalach, and to do it twice in the verses, once in Aramaic. That's what we're going to do in due course over there. Others may argue on the performance of this custom and say that it should be not recited as segula, but more on that later. Let's just say some people would say that you should say it in itself, but many different opinions. Many would say it as a segula also. So why is it? So there should be some sort of effort, let's just say, in of itself for this specific tefillah. Everyone agrees. I think all sides. Rabbi Hoffman will actually be quoted as saying, from reciting the Parsha of Man, we should do the hishtadlut, the effort to become financially successful. Everyone should take on different undertakings in order to be able to do that. Let's say all parnasa, wealth and income, obviously we know it comes from God. But he actually brings a caveat. Hashem told Adam Harishon, B'zeyat apecha tochal lechem. By the sweat of the brow will you eat bread. We must make an effort as well. We could do our hishtadlut, as I say. And aside from ensuring that we have the means to make wealth, a parnasa, there's obviously many things we can do to increase our financial stability. Obviously, avoiding wasting time. One has got to make hishtadlut, making sure they get the right deals, and so on and so forth. One should not just be negligent and buy whatever they want and waste their money whatever they want. Sometimes Hashem gives us parnasa, gives us shefa. We've got to be careful with what we give, which charity institutions. We should do our due diligence in all different things. But now going back to the topic of segula, just using Rav Hoffman here. What is it? We're going to explore within regards to the history of the Rabbi Romanov, who we're going to speak about over here. But why the origin of Tuesday of the Parshat B'Shalach aspect to it. I think there's earlier sources that recommend reciting it daily. So many people will actually recite on a daily basis this Parshat HaMann, and not just one day a year. I think the famous Rabbeinu Bachya, he would actually state, actually quoting from Parshat Shemot chapter 16, verse 16, he says, "It is a tradition in the hand of the great rabbis that whoever recites the Parashah of the Man each day is assured that he will not lose out in his world of his mezonot." Over here. So obviously, just quoted over there, that the early source of reciting the Parashah, just stating that it's important. But I don't think there's any mention over there per se of it being on a Tuesday. So why a Tuesday? Why not Wednesday? Why not Thursday? Why not Monday? So the question is posed. So when exactly did the newer custom to say on a Tuesday in this specific portion, and why is it promulgated of this minhag? So many will trace this minhag to Rab Menachem Mendel of Riminov, either between 1745 to 1815. We'll explore a bit with regards to his history in due course. And he was one of the 5 Talmidim of Rabbi Elimelech of Lezinsk. And some people might even trace this minhag back to Rabbi Shalom of Stropkov. He lived between 1855 to 1940. We have to see the Yisrael Hazmanim of Rav David Rosal over here. But I think it's clear that Rav Shalom was quoting the famous Rumenova rabbi and did not make it, let's say, come with this idea himself, just seemingly over here. I think the original book, the Sefer of the Rumenova, if I'm not mistaken, is not necessarily that easily accessible, as only, I think, the first volume itself is readily extant in itself. Now, it's actually interesting. I think in Siman 184 of the Tashbats, it actually cites a daily reading of it, and it's effect in the name of the Yerushalmi. And it adds the words, "And I am the guarantor." Now, the great Torah, I think in Siman number 1 and number 5, also cites this tradition in the name of the Yerushalmi in Brachot. Also, the Mishnah Berurah weighs in also, I think in chapter number 1 in number 13, citing this source. And let's just say, I think there's like an issue, let's just say, in itself, that it is not to be found in our version, nor in any manuscript of the Yerushalmi also respectively. Now, I think the Sefer Minhag also, to add on, in Hilchot Shabbat, in chapter 44, cites the source as a Yerushalmi in Yuma. So it's not necessarily in the Yerushalmi in Yuma also, just quoting Rav Hoffman over here. I think there's, let's just say, a Hashara to this, like let's say a traditional answer that can be given is when the Rishonim refer to the Yerushalmis in themselves that have, let's say, not featured in themselves, is that the term is used loosely by the Rishon, and that Yerushalmi often included midrashim that were edited in the land of Israel. This, but over here, seemingly Rav Hoffman will point out, it's quoted over here in this article, it won't necessarily conform over here because the Torah specifically refers to Yerushalmi in Brachot. So it must be then that the version of Yerushalmi that the Torah had is not necessarily found over here. So why the man over here? Why this topic of the bread, the heavenly bread, the man, as we're learning about here in Parshat B'Shalach in this week's Parsha? Why we've got to single this out more so than other miracles we've experienced? We know all throughout Jewish history there was various different nisim, different miracles that happened. Now I think the famous Rabbi Sadia Gaon, the Sadia the genius, in his introduction to his Emunat V'Dayot, he explains that the man, this heavenly bread, was a miracle that was of a daily occurrence. The other miracles were not coming the whole time. We see the Be'er Miriam, actually, which we learn about, I think, Parshat Be'halotzacha, if I'm not mistaken. We specifically speak about that over here. We'll speak about it in this week's Parsha, also after the Kriyat Yamsuf. Although not mentioned by Rav Sadia Gaon, even after the 40-year traveling in the desert, the heavenly bread would play a very important role. The container of the man, the Tzimtzenet Haman, was placed alongside the Aaron in both the Mishkan and the Bet HaMikdash until the days of Yeshayahu, who was the king, 100 years before the destruction of the first Bet HaMikdash, the first temple. And it would also serve as a reminder over there in of itself. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan will also point out, continuing this article of Rav Hoffman in the Yeshiva World News, the Aruch HaShulchan points out that in his time the Parshat HaMann was not found in the Sidurim, respectively. We don't know if it ever was. He explains its absence in Sidur as stemming from the fact that the Parsha mentions a number of times, let's say, the embarrassing detail that the children of Israel, the Klal Yisrael, let's say they complained maybe inside deserts, and wouldn't necessarily be proper to place this in the Sidurim over there, just not to remind, let's say, this embarrassment of that specific episode on that side of things. But however, I think in modern day, many various different Siddurim prayer books actually mention it. Let's say, notwithstanding the Aruch HaShulchan's ethos on this issue. So how does it work, this Parshat HaMann? It's so many different commentators, Mefarshim, explain that it serves to entreat within our minds that our wealth, our parnasah, our sustenance comes from Hashem, from God. It seems that this daily recital, many people will say it daily, which I very much recommend it, of the Parshat HaMann, helps us eradicate within our minds and our thoughts over here. And the Mishnah Berurah also writes that it is not enough to just say this itself, this passage. Its message must be fully imbibed in us. Other great rabbis would point out that the principle behind how it works lies in the fact that reciting it will build up, let's say, our bitachon in God. I think, for example, the Minchat Asher will actually bring this out. Well, some others state that of both two sides of the same coin, let's say, it seems to this specific author that they are in fact two separate concepts. Now let's talk about, there's a third method that Rav Hoffman will bring, taking, let's say, a more less mystical approach within regards to this topic. The reading of the parasha serves to calm a person's anxieties about struggling for sustenance, for parnasah, and it will help him focus better through understanding that all is from God. So it's a reminder that everything is from Hashem also over here, we have to point out. And I think this also is brought down to be the understanding of the Tzemach Tzedek. I think in the Parshat HaMann, in Shin 5644, reference and index of page 100 over there. Now the Shivat Musar, I think in chapter number 40, cites in the name of the Mukubalim that it should be recited, as mentioned earlier, as part of a Shnai Mikra ve'Chat Targum, twice in Hebrew and once in Aramaic of Unclus over here. Now I think there's a Noheg Tzon Yosef in Siman 34 will quote the Shnai Mikra detail as having been first written by Rabbeinu Tam in his Sefer Hayusha, and I think the Shlar's father in his Yesh Nochlin will also write from this. I think from the Shlar's father himself, this is an ideal method to do so also. That's what Rav Hoffman quotes over. We have to point out. And from the Nohek Tzon Yosef, it seems that it will not be effective at all if it's not done in Shnai Mikra V'Chat Targum. You will need both of those varying factors over here. So this variant blessing, let's say, I think Rav Hoffman will also bring out that it's interesting that the sources indicate that a person will simply not lose out or suffer a loss of mezonot. In the Midrash Talpiyot, I believe, which is in a section on Havdalah, it writes that the entire Parshat HaMann is mesugal for success and wealth, and the nature of the blessing, let's just say, is there. So when should it be said? So as we said before, we are here now on the Tuesday of Parshat V'Shalach. Both the Berei Tev and the Mishnah Berurah indicate that it should be recited in the morning before the Korbanot are recited before Shacharit. Okay, we're after that point at the moment, so seemingly that would have been the optimum time. The Otzrot Chaim, however, cites that the Rekanti in the name of the Zohar, that it should be said after Shacharit, although he does not actually source it. So actually we happen to be after Shacharit territory at the moment. I recited Shacharit about 2-3 hours ago. So although he does not source it, I think the most likely reference, however, is to the Zohar. I think in the Parashat Pinchas, I think the Parnasa lo chatzi lemishal ela basar tzlusa. That's requesting for one's Parnasa is only viable after praying. So how important it is to say a prayer beforehand. I actually just gave a shir beforehand, so I don't know if that has the same panache zest within regards to that. Since rulings, let's say, of the standard halachic poskim generally, let's say, outweigh the rulings of Mukubalim, this is what Rav Hoffman says over, it would seem that it's preferable to follow the Mishnah Berurah, but as always, each person should consult, obviously, his own rabbi, local Orthodox rabbi, or his posek also. There's various other minhagim also Rav Hoffman will bring down. The Mishmeret Shalom, I think 14 number 2, says a sefer written, I think apparently in Yiddish, states that Rav Pinchas Mikoritz cited the minhag and also added that one should further say the 13 ikarim of the Rambam each morning too. So that's another good segula seemingly for wealth. What if one's minhag is not necessary to say this? Obviously, many people do not have the minhag to say it on this day, and some, let's say, remain very firm on this minhag. I think Rav Ovadia also writes that this is not their minhag. There is a fascinating thing, Rabbeinu Yonah, in the book of Sha'arei Teshuvah, I think chapter 13, number 17, where he writes that it is a Torah mitzvah to remember the falling of the man. So it's actually a mitzvah itself to remember this the man in of itself, and this entire episode. That being the case, it doesn't hurt to recite it. It will help us focus on the mitzvah. So I think there's a caveat also. Rav Hoffman bring down from Rav Shmuel Hominer in his Chumash called Evet HaMelech. I think actually in the book of Shemot in page number 42, he brings out, let's say, obvious point, Rav Hoffman will say, but a fascinating point. When reciting the Parshat HaMann, one should take care not to recite it as a Segulot. That's what he points out. Why is this? So that he will not be serving Hashem just means of lekabel a pras, for the sake of earning a prize over here, let's just say, on conditioning of receiving a reward. And I think there's a yesodot of Judaism itself, the fundamentals of our serving of Hashem should be done lishma, as we very much learn about in Ethics of the Father, in Pirkei Avot itself, respectively. Now, we're going to recite it over. We're going to speak about the history of Rav Riminov in the due course also, and we're going to talk about other tips of Parnasa also, various different tefillot, and so on and so forth over here in this special edition over here. As it happens to be anyone tuning in live at the moment, we happen to be on the day of Parshat HaMann. It's a Tuesday of the Torah portion of Parshat B'Shalach, and it's a special edition over here where we're going to talk about it. We're going to speak about the Ramona Rebbe who is attributed to it over here, and thanks very much to we can use at Smut's website over here, which actually lists over the Pesukim also to say within regards to this. So everyone, we're going to say it after me. There's especially Hiratzon, I think we say before the Parsha in of itself. That's something I'll have to very much point out. And then afterwards we're going to speak a bit more about this Segula and the history of the rabbi it is attributed to also. I think there's also a Hiratzon we will say after. So this might take about 10-15 minutes, but everyone, it should be found in the Sidrim. Search the Parshat HaMann in itself. So I'm just going to say an introduction within regards to Parshat HaMann over here, and then I'm going to start with the Yiratzon, and then the Pasuk, which, if I'm not mistaken, it's going to actually start from Pasuk number 4 in that portion of, I think it comes from Shemot, the chapter 16. I think we'll start from verse number 4, if I'm not mistaken, over there itself. So the instruction says over here, Itab b'sfarim, kol mi shomer Parshat HaMann b'kol yom, lo yachse lo parnasa, u'mekotem omrim, it's a Yiratzon, v'yochol lomar Parshat HaMann afilu b'Shabbat. So you can even say, it's stating over here, on Shabbat itself. Okay, so we're going to start with the Hiratzon now, and then we're going to start with Pesukim and let's just say the Aramaic also over here. So be patient, and we'll say Yiratzon melebnecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu shetazmin parnasa lechol amecha beit Yisrael uparnasati uparnasat anshei beiti bichlalam benachat v'lo b'tza'al bekavod v'lo b'bizui בהתד ולא באיסור, כדי שנוכל לעבוד עבודתך וללמוד תורתך כמו שזנת לאבותינו מן במדבר בארץ סייה וערבה. ויאמר השם אל משה, הנני ממציא לכם לחם מן השמיים, ויצא העם ולקטו דבר יום ביומו למען אנסינו הילך בתורתי אם לא. ויאמר אדוני אל משה, הנני ממציא לכם לחם מן השמיים, ויצא העם ולקטו דבר יום ביומו, למען אנסינו הילך בתורתי אם לא. ואמר אדוני למשה, האנה מחית לכון לחמה מן שמיא, ויפקון עמה וילקטון פתגם יום ביומי, ודיל דאנסינון היחון באורייתי אם לא. והיה ביום השישי והכינו את אשר יביאו, והיה משנה על אשר ילקטו יום יום. והיה ביום השישי והכינו את אשר יביאו, והיה משנה על אשר ילקטו יום יום. ויהי ביומה שתטעה ותקנון יד דיאטון, ויהי על חצרין על דילקטון יום יום. ויאמר משה ואהרון אל כל בני ישראל ערב, ידעתם כי אדוני הוציא אתכם מארץ מצרים. ויאמר משה ואהרון אל כל בני ישראל ערב, ידעתם כי אדוני הוציא אתכם מארץ מצרים. ואמר משה ואהרון לכל בני ישראל, ברמשה ותדעון ערי אדוני אפק יתכון מערה דמצרים. ובוקר וראיתם את כבוד אדוני בשמעו את תנותיכם על אדוני, ונחנו מה כי תלינו עלינו. ובוקר וראיתם את כבוד אדוני ושמעו את צלותיכם על אדוני ונחנו מה כי תלינו עלינו ובצפרה ותחזון ית יקרה אדוני כד שמיע קדמו ית תחון על ממרד אדוני ונחנה מערי את רעמתון עלנה ויאמר משה בתת אדוני לכם בערב בשר לאכול ולחם בבוקר ולסבוע בשמוע אדוני את צלונותיכם אשר אתם מלינים עליו ונחנו מה לא עלינו צלונותיכם כי על אדוני ויאמר משה בתת אדוני לכם בערב בשר לאכול ולחם בבוקר לסבוע בשמוע אדוני את צלונותיכם אשר אתם מלינים עליו ונחנו מה לא עלינו צלונותיכם כי על אדוני ואמר משה בדיעתן אדוני לכון ברמשה בשרה למיכל ולחמה ובצפרה למספה בדשמיען קדם אדוני ית תרעמותכון די אתון מתרעמין אלוהי ונחנה מה לא עלנה תרעמותכון אלהן על ממרד אדוני ויאמר משה אל אהרון אמור אל כל עדת בני ישראל קרבו לפני אדוני כי שמע את צלונותיכם ויאמר משה אל אהרון אמור אל כל עדת בני ישראל קרבו לפני אדוני כי שמע את צלונותיכם ואמר משה לאהרון אמר לכל כנישתה דבני ישראל קרבו קדם אדוני הרי שמיען קדמוהי ית תרעמותכון ויהי כדבר אהרון אל כל עדת בני ישראל ויפנו אל המדבר והנה כבוד אדוני נראה בענן ויהי כדבר אהרון אל כל עדת בני ישראל ויפנו אל המדבר והנה כבוד אדוני נראה בענן והבה כד מליל אהרון עם כל כנישתה דבני ישראל והתפניו למדברה ויקרא אדוני יתגלי בעננה וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור ומליל אדוני אל משה למימר שמעתי את צלונותות בני ישראל דבר עליהם לאמור בין 40 תאכלו בשר ובבוקר תשבעו לכם וידעתם כי אני אדוני לכם שמעתי את צלונות בני ישראל דבר עליהם לאמור בין 40 תאכלו בשר ובבוקר תשבעו לכם וידעתם כי אני אדוני אלוהיכם שמיעה קדמי ית תרעמת בני ישראל מלל עם הון למימר בין שמשיה תאכלון בשרה ובצפרה תשבעון לחמה ותטעון הרי אנא אדוני להכון ויהי בערב תעל הסלב ותכס את המחנה ובבוקר הייתה שכבת הטל סביב למחנה ויהי בערב תעל הסלב ותכס את המחנה ובבוקר הייתה שכבת הטל סביב למחנה והבה ברמשה וסליקת סלב וחפת ית משריתה ובצפרה הבת נחתת תלה סוחו למשריתה ותעל שכבת הטל והנה על פני המדבר דק מחוספס דק ככפור על הארץ ותעל שכבת הטל והנה על פני המדבר דק מחוספס דק ככפור על הארץ וסליקת נחתת תלה ועל אפי מדברה דעדק מקלף דעדק כגיר כגלידה על ערה ויראו בני ישראל ויאמרו איש אל אחיו מן הוא כי לא ידעו מהו ויאמר משה עליהם הוא הלחם אשר נתן אדוני לכם לאכלה ויראו בני ישראל ויאמרו איש אל אחיו מן הוא כי לא ידעו מהו ויאמר משה עליהם הוא הלחם אשר נתן אדוני לכם לאכלה וחזו בני ישראל ואמרו גבר לאחוהי מנה הוא הרי לא ידעו מה הוא ואמר משה להון הוא לחמה דיהב אדוני לכון למיכל זה הדבר אשר ציווה אדוני לקטו ממנו איש לפי אך לא אומר לגולגולת מספר נפשותיכם איש לאשר באהלו תיקחו זה הדבר אשר ציווה אדוני לקטו ממנו איש לפי אך לא אומר לגולגולת מספר נפשותיכם איש לאשר באהלו תיקחו ידין פתגמה די פקיד אדוני לקוטו מיני גבר לפום מחלי אומרה לגול גלתה מניין נפשותיכם גבר לדי ומשכני תסבון ויעשו כן בני ישראל, וילקטו המרבה והממעיט, ויעשו כן בני ישראל, וילקטו המרבה והממעיט, ועבדו כן בני ישראל, ולקטו דעסקי ודעזר, ויאמרו ואומר ולא הדיף, המרבה והממעיט לא החסיר איש לפי אוכלו לקטו, ויעמדו ואומר ולא הדיף, המרבה והממעיט לא החסיר איש לפי אוכלו לקטו, אוכלו ואומרה ולא אותר דעסקי ודעזר, לא חסיר גבר לפום מכלי לקטו. ויאמר משה עליהם, איש אל יוצר ממנו עד בוקר. ויאמר משה עליהם, איש אל יוצר ממנו עד בוקר. ואמר משה להון, אנש לא ישאר מיני עד צפרה. ולא שמעו אל משה, ויוציאו אנשים ממנו עד בוקר, וירום תולעים, ויבאש ויקצוף עליהם משה. ולא שמעו אל משה, ויוציאו אנשים ממנו עד בוקר, וירום תולעים, ויבאש ויקצוף עליהם משה. ולא קבלו מן משה, ואשארו גבריה מיני עד צפרה ורחש, ריחשה וסרי ורגז עליהון משה. וילקטו אותו בבוקר, איש כפי אכלו, וחם השמש ונמס. וילקטו אותו בבוקר, איש כפי אכלו, וחם השמש ונמס. ולקטו יצא בצוואר, גבר לפום מכלי, ומה דמשתער מיני, על אפי כד חמה אלוהי, שמשה פשר. ויהי ביום השישי, לקטו לחם משנה, שני האומר לאחד, ויבואו כל נשיאי העדה ויגידו למשה. ויהי ביום השישי, לקטו לחם משנה, שני האומר לאחד, ויבואו כל נשיאי העדה ויגידו למשה. והבה ביומה שתאה לקטו לחמה על חד טרין, אומרין לחד ועתו כל רברבי, כנשתה וחביאו למשה. ויאמר עליהם, הוא אשר דיבר אדוני, שבתון שבת קודש לאדוני, מחר את אשר תאפו אפו, ואת אשר בשלו, ואת כל העודף הניחו לכם למשמרת עד הבוקר. ויאמר עליהם, הוא אשר דיבר אדוני, שבתון שבת קודש לאדוני, מחר את אשר תאפו אפו, ואת אשר בשלו, ואת כל העודף הניחו לכם למשמרת עד הבוקר. ואמר להון הוא, די מליל אדוני שבת קודשה קדם, אדוני מחר ית די אתון עתידין למפה אפוא, וית די אתון עתידין לבשלה, בשילו וית כל מוצרה, הצנעו לכון למטרת עד ספרה. ויניחו אותו עד הבוקר, כאשר ציווה משה, ולא הבאיש ורימה לא הייתה בו. ויניחו אותו עד הבוקר, כאשר ציווה משה, ולא הבאיש ורימה לא הייתה בו. והצנעו יצא עד ספרה כמה דפקיד משה, ולא סרי ריחשה לא הווה רי. ויאמר משה, איכלוהו היום, כי שבת היום לאדוני היום, לא תמצאוהו בשדה. ויאמר משה, איכלוהו היום, כי שבת היום לאדוני היום, לא תמצאוהו בשדה. ואמר משה, איכלוהי יומה, דין הרי שבתה יומה, דין קדם אדוני יומה, דין לא תשכחוני בחקלה. 6 ימים תלקטוהו, וביום השביעי שבת לא יהיה בו. 6 ימים תלקטוהו, וביום השביעי שבת לא יהיה בו. 6 ימים תלקטוני, וביומה שביעה שבתה לא יהיה בי. ויהי ביום השביעי, יצאו מן העם ללקוט ולא מצאו. ויהי ביום השביעי, יצאו מן העם ללקוט ולא מצאו. ועבר ביום השביעה, נפקו מן עמה למלקט ולא אשכחו. ויאמר אדוני אל משה, עד אנה מענתם לשמור מצוותי ותורתי, ויאמר אדוני אל משה עד אנה מענתם לשמור מצוותיי ותורותיי. ואמר אדוני למשה עד אימתי אתון מסרבין למיתר פיקודי והוראייתי. ראו כי אדוני נתן לכם השבת, על כן הוא נותן לכם ביום השישי לחם יומיים. שבו איש תחתיו, אל יצא איש ממקומו ביום השביעי. ראו כי אדוני נתן לכם השבת, על כן הוא נותן לכם ביום השישי לחם יומיים. שבו איש תחתיו, אל יצא איש ממקומו ביום השביעי. חזו הרי אדוני יחב לכון שבתה, על כן הוא יחב לכון. ביומה שתיטע לכם טרין יומין, ציוו אנש תוכי לא יבוק אנש מעט רי ביומה שביעה. וישבתו העם ביום השביעי, וישבתו העם ביום השביעי, ונחו עמה ביומה שביעה. ויקראו בית ישראל את שמו מן, והוא כזרע גד לבן, וטעמו כצפיחית בדבש. ויקראו בית ישראל את שמו מן, והוא כזרע גד לבן, וטעמו כצפיחית בדבש. וקרוא בית ישראל יד שמי מן, והוא קבע זרע גדה חיבר וטעמי כאזכרי טבן בדבש. ויאמר משה זה הדבר אשר ציווה אדוני מלוא האומר ממנו למשמרת לדורותיכם, למען יראו את הלחם אשר האכלתי אתכם במדבר והוציאי אתכם מארץ מצרים. ויאמר משה זה הדבר אשר ציווה אדוני מלוא האומר ממנו למשמרת לדורותיכם, למען יראו את הלחם אשר האכלתי אתכם במדבר והוציאי אתכם מארץ מצרים. ואמר משה דין פתגמה די פקיד אדוני מלא אומרה מיני למצרה לדריכון בדיל דיחזון ית לחמה די אוכלית יתכון במדברה באפקותי יתכון מערה דמצרים. ויאמר משה אל אהרון קח צנצנת אחת ותן שמה מלוא האומר מן והנח אותו לפני אדוני למשמרת לדורותיכם. ויאמר משה אל אהרון קח צנצנת אחת ותן שמה מלוא האומר מן והנח אותו לפני אדוני למשמרת לדורותיכם. ואמר משה אל אהרון סב צלוחית חדה וחב תמן מלא אומרה מן ועצנה יתי קדם אדוני למצרה לדריכון. כאשר ציווה אדוני אל משה ויניחהו אהרון לפני העדות למשמרת, כאשר ציווה אדוני אל משה ויניחהו אהרון לפני העדות למשמרת. כמה די פקיד אדוני למשה ועצני אהרון קדם סהדותה למצרה. ובני ישראל אכלו את המן 40 שנה עד בואם אל ארץ נושבת את המן, אכלו עד בואם אל קצה ארץ כנען. ובני ישראל אכלו את המן 40 שנה עד בואם אל ארץ נושבת את המן, אכלו עד בואם אל קצה ארץ כנען. ובני ישראל אכלו ית מנה 40 שנים עד מי תהון לארעה ית ותה ית מנה אכלו עד דעתו לסייפי ערה דכנען. והאומר עשירית האיפה הוא, והאומר עשירית האיפה הוא, ואומרה חד מן עשרה בתלת שאין הוא. אתה הוא אדוני לבדיך, אתה עשית את השמיים ושמי השמיים הארץ וכל אשר עליה הימים וכל אשר בהם, ואתה מחיה את כולם. ואתה הוא שעשית ניסים ונפלאות גדולות תמיד עם אבותינו גם במדבר, המתרת להם לחם מן השמיים ומצור החלמיש הוצאת להם ומים וגם נתת להם כל צרכיהם, סמלותם לא בלת מעליהם, כן ברחמך הרבים ובחסדיך העצומים תזוננו ותפרנסנו ותאכל כלינו ותספיק לנו כל צרכינו וצרכי עמך בית ישראל המרובים במילוי וברווח בלי טורח ועמל גדול מתחת ידיך הנקייה ולא מתחת ידי בשר ודם. יהי רצון לבניך, אדוני אלוהי ואלוהי אבותיי, שתכין לי ולאנשי ביתי כל מחסורנו ותזמין לנו כל צרכנו לכל יום ביום, ומחיינו די מחסורנו, ולכל שעה ושעה משעותינו די סיפוקנו, ולכל עצם מעצמנו די מחייתנו מידך הטובה ורחבה ולא כמעות, מפעלנו וקוצר חסנו ומזער גמילויותינו, ויהיו מזונותיי ומזונות אנשי ביתי וזרעי וזרע זרעי מסורים בידך ולא ביד בשר ודם. אתה הוא אדוני לבדך, אתה עשית את השמיים ושמי השמיים הארץ וכל אשר עליה הימים וכל אשר בהם, ואתה מחיה את כולם, ואתה הוא שעשית ניסים ונפלאות גדולות תמיד עם אבותינו גם במדבר, המטרת להם לחם מן השמיים ומיצוע חלמיש הוצאת להם מים וגם נתת להם כל צרכיהם, סמלותם לא הובלת מעליהם כן ברחמך הרבים ובחסדיך העצומים, תזוננו ותפרנסנו ותכלכלנו ותספיק לנו כל צרכינו וצרכי עמך בית ישראל המרובים מילוי וברווח בלי טרח ועמל גדול מתחת ידיך הנקייה ולא מתחת ידי בשר ודם. יהי רצון לפניך, אדוני אלוהי ואלוהי אבותיי, שתכין לי ולאנשי ביתי כל מחסורנו ותזמין לנו כל צרכנו לכל יום ויום, מחיינו די מחסורנו ולכל שעה ושעה משעותינו די סיפוקנו לכל עצם מעצמנו די מחייתנו מידך הטובה ורחבה ולא כמעות, מפעלנו וקוצר חסדינו ומזער גמולתנו, ויהיו מזונותיי ומזונות אנשי ביתי וזרעי וזרע זרעי מסורים בידיך ולא ביד בשר ודם. Okay, very interesting over there. We just stated over pretty much the entire tefillah over here. I hope it goes in it conforms to the other tefillot also. Let's say something about Rabbi Menachem Mendel Romanov, who is attributed for this specific tefillah on this specific day. Who was he? He lived between 1745 to 1815. He was a famous Hasidic rabbi, and he was one of the first 5 distributors, let's just say, of the Hasidic movement in Poland and in Galicia, together with Rabbi Yaakov Yitzhak Lublin, Rabbi Yisrael Hopstein, Rabbi Abraham Yoshua Heschel of Acta, Rabbi Kalon Yemos Kalman Epstein. He happens to be. So I think he was born in Poland. He died in Poland, if I'm not mistaken. He had children, including Rabbi Natan Leib, Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov of Bilia Kamin, and Fega and Chana, if I'm not mistaken. His parents, his father was Rabbi Yosef Sadlovsky, if I'm not mistaken. His mother was Rabbi Liva Spira, if I'm not mistaken. He's part of the Romanov dynasty, we have to point out over there. Now, Rabbi Menachem Mendel was born in the year 1745 in Naui, in Kroiskin. It was an old rabbinical Polish family. Apparently they descended from the Baal HaTurim reported over here. According to one account, he was introduced to Hasidut at the age of 18 when he met Rabbi Dov Ber of Mezerich. In his youth, he would study under the Schmelk of Nikolsburg at the Reichswall and Joseph Ben Meir Teomin in Berlin, if I'm not mistaken. His mentor was Rabbi Elimelech of Luzinsk, and he was among, let's say, the most celebrated students. I think after Rabbi Elimelech passed away in 1786, Rabbi Menachem Mendel assumed this position as a principal Hasidic master of Galicia, we have to point out over here. Very interesting enough. He was one of 5 main disciples, let's say, Rabbi Elimelech of Luzinsk, if I'm not mistaken. They had many different prestigious scholars in his learning. He enjoyed the confidence and esteem of Zusha of Hanipol, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Ruba of Liska, if I'm not mistaken. I think he'd become a head of Jewish court and various other rabbis we have to point out over that point in time. Now, Rabbi Menachem Mendel taught many future luminaries of the Hasidic movement, including Rabbi Naftali of Ropshitz, Rabbi Tzvi Melech Spiro of Dinov, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch of Zdichov, Rabbi Moshe of Sambo, if I'm not mistaken. He's the author of Tfilat Moshe. Rabbi Yechaskel Panath, if I'm not mistaken, and Meir of Abta, if I'm not mistaken, or Leshamayim, he was the author. Rabbi Shimon of Yaroslav, Rabbi Shlomo Leib of Letz Echna, Rabbi Asher Yisha of Ropshritz, and various other rabbis also. He encouraged Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum to become a rabbi, And many Hasidic dynasties have the roots in Rabbi Menachem Mendel's court, if I'm not mistaken. In 1807, Rabbi Menachem Mendel moved his court to Rimanov, and resided there until he passed away. His arrival, let's say, would accelerate the town's socio-economic development. Many Hasidim now journey to the rabbi and requiring food and lodging, provided the local Jewish community with income. And the rabbi's court also offered employment for many waiters, servants, guides, messenger bearers, maintenance, people and sextons, let's just say, in himself. He was heavily involved with Jewish welfare. He was very generous for orphans and strangers. He was concerned with arbitrating proper justice. He urged community to support a school for poor children. And very, very interesting. He would forbid burial societies from overcharging wealthy families. And that's another thing. On the last day of every month, the rabbi would check the scales in every shop. But the Rebbe's social concerns ranged beyond Rimanov. He presided over the Kolel Meir Balhanes organization in Galicia, which would provide funds, let's say, for struggling Jewish communities in the land of Israel. He is best known for giving sermons, Shabbat sermons, on Parshat HaMann for 22 years. This was interesting. We just did the blessing of the man over here, during which period his students testified he brought down blessings from heaven. Very interesting. Now, the rabbi is probably believed, obviously, to have introduced this Segulot we just said over for Parnassah, for sustenance, of reciting Parshat HaMann in the form of Shnai Mikra Ve'echad Targum. This is annually on the Tuesday of Parshat Beshalach, which is this week, over here. And I think he was an opponent of modernity and Jewish emancipation, if I'm not mistaken. He would fear that there would be assimilation and a breakdown of the Jewish way of life within regards to that. So he's regarded one of the founders of ultra-Orthodox Judaism in Poland and Hungary. And that's interesting enough. Also, just another tidbit over here. The rabbi had strict guidelines, ultimately became the set standard of dress in the Hasidut community in of itself. So that's very interesting. It's also added, just using Wikipedia source here, Rabbi Menachem Mendel was anguished by the exile of the Jewish people from their homeland. He maintained they could only reach their full spiritual potential in the land of Israel, and anticipated the coming of Moshiach. Towards the end of his life, the Romanova associated Napoleon with Gog and Magog, and he prayed for his victory, which he believed would usher the Messianic age. Legend has it that the Rebbe's form appeared to Napoleon in dreams, as long as the latter was under divine protection. So he had a great family in of itself. Rabbi Natan Leib Torem, he died in 1846 in Rimenau. Wow. Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Torem, he died in 1827. He was an Abbedin, head of Jewish court in Bilyei Kamin. There was Rabbanit Feiger was married to Rabbi Klonimos of Lankut. Rabbanit Chana was married to Rabbi Mordechai, who was an Abbedin of Rimenau. Also interesting enough. So also other descendants: Chava Eisler of Turka, Gittel Guzik of Khorasan, Aaron Torem of Kangazuka, Pinkas Torem of Ramenau. Very, very interesting. I think he had another daughter, if I'm not mistaken, who got married to Hertz from Ustrasky, if I'm not mistaken. There's a great legacy with regards to him, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's reported over, though, his sons refused to succeed, and the dynasty was later assumed by rabbis, former servant Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Cohen of Rimanov. I think he was between 1778 until 1846. He was also called the Rabbi Reb Tzvi Hirsch Mishares, if I'm not mistaken. He was author of the Be'erot HaMayim, if I'm not mistaken. And Rabbi Menachem Mendel's Torah commentary was first published in the Menachem Tzion. It was printed, I think, in 1851. It was based on notes of his student, Rabbi Yechezkel Panach. He'd have other compilations of his work were published in Divrei Menachem, if I'm not mistaken. That was in Lviv in the 1863, and in Ilana Dechaya, which is in 1908, if I'm not mistaken. Various commentaries were translated to English as the Torah Discourses, the Holy Tzaddik, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimano. This is in New Jersey in the year 1997. Various stories also are related over within regards to Romanova Rebbe, which were first published in Aaron Marcus's Der Chasidismus, if I'm not mistaken, in 1901, and the Beryl Ehrman's Devarim Arevim, if I'm not mistaken, this was in volume 1 in Munkach in 1905. Various other biographies and other books were connected to him, if I am not mistaken, and there's various different commemorations in his memory. So he was a rabbi that's attributed, let's say, partly or totally to Parshat HaMann, which we point out. Now, other tips within regards to Segulot, I want to just share over, just using the Rabbi Meir Balanes website over here. They've got interesting other tidbits if people are looking for tips to become wealthy over here. So it's a good resource over here. One of the, obviously first of all, what's a segula? That's the first question again. Yeah? It can be translated as a charm, an action that person does to affect a certain change in circumstances. There are segulot that merit, let's say, a salvation in many areas of life. For example, if someone's looking for their partner, an ordained match, a shidduch. For having children, there's segulot. For having a safe childbirth, as well as many segulot for parnasah, for livelihood, and an abundance of blessing. They actually say Jews don't believe in luck or good luck charms. So how does a segula actually work? That's what the website says of the Rabbi Meir Balanes. Segulot are usually a spiritual action, such as saying a specific prayer or doing an action that demonstrates a spiritual belief. These types of actions work to elevate a person so that he becomes worthy of this, let's say, Yeshua over here, the salvation. Another explanation, I think, which is found in the Ran, is that segulot are like a medicine. There might be certain medical medicine prescribed for a specific illness, but it won't work for every patient. Similarly, a segula would be prescribed for a specific circumstance, but it doesn't work in the same way for everyone, you could argue. But therefore, if one is experiencing difficulty specifically for finances or parnasah, such as when one needs to look for a new job or financing for one's business, one might consider doing a segula for livelihood as a merit for Yeshua over here. There's various other segulot they will bring about here. Obviously, a popular one would be to learn Torah, which that's obviously the optimum. Many Sepharim mention Torah learning as segula for livelihood. Some Sepharim say specifically to learn Gemara and Talmud on a regular basis. Others say to learn Mishnah. But either way, whatever one chooses, one's got to set a time to learn before starting to deal with business matters. They should have fixed kavua time of learning. Being careful to learn Torah before doing business demonstrates an understanding of where livelihood truly comes from. Another segula is to pour a lot of water at netilat yadayim, washing the hands. This segula for increasing wealth is known for thousands of years, and it's mentioned in Talmud, I believe, in the Gemara. And it goes as saying, while washing netilat yadayim before eating bread, one should pour a lot of water on each hand to make sure that the hand is fully washed. As halacha, Jewish law, dictates, the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch quotes the Gemara that being generous with the amount of water you pour is a segula for livelihood. Also, very, very interesting. But there's a catch over here is that you can't add water when you wash just in order to get rich. If the only thing you're thinking about is segula for wealth, this segula won't work. Instead, one should concentrate on fulfilling the mitzvah of netilat yadayim as best as possible. That's obviously reciting Parshat HaMann. Obviously, the website of the Rabbi Meir Balanes will actually quote that in itself. We've spoken about that in detail already. So very important. Another segula, one should anyway do this, is be careful with Birkat Hamazon, the blessing of Parnasah. Many books, Sfarim, they mention being careful with Birkat Hamazon, grace after meals, with the assurance that anyone who is careful with this will never be lacking. Therefore, when one says Birkat Hamazon, you should try to concentrate on the words that one is saying. In this blessing, we express gratitude to Hashem for our current sustenance, as well as adding a tefillah for parnasah to be provided in the future. Seeing both of these aspects with concentration reminds us that Hashem provides our sustenance, and that knowledge in itself makes us deserving of continued abundance. Specifically, one should concentrate when reciting the words at the end of the first blessing. Poteach et yadecha u'masbiya l'chol chai ratzon. You, Hashem, open your hands and satisfy every living being desires. Some sources will actually say to recite this Birkat Hamazon out loud in a joyful tune. If possible, doing so can also be, let's say, an aid to concentration, because Birkat Hamazon is a blessing in which we thank God, Hashem, for providing us, enhancing us. Our recital of it is a very appropriate segula for increasing wealth. Expressing our gratitude in the best way makes us deserving for much more. Another nice segula, this is the first time I'm actually reading this, is to buy a new knife for Rosh Hashanah. Now, why are you over here? A Jewish tradition teaches that one's parnasah for the year is decreed on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. So it makes sense to have a special segula just for this time of the year. And indeed, the segula you can fulfill just before Rosh Hashanah is to buy a new knife before the holiday. The knife is a reference to the words of the Rosh Hashanah Tefillah, Hachotech Chaim Lechol Chai. What is that over here, friends? Which literally means that Hashem slices life for every living being. Buying the new knife symbolizes your hope to be included in this slice of life, which refers to livelihood. It's also popular to bake a schlissel challah, which is a key to parnasa. What is schlissel? Let's say it's another time-dependent skula for parnasa. Is the making of the schlissel challah. It's called a key bread. Baking challah for Shabbat is always a mitzvah, a good deed. But there's 1 week when the challah has special significance. That week is a week immediately after Pesach, after Passover, when the Jewish nation has abstained from challah and all leavened breads for 7 days. The segula over here is either to bake a key into a challah or to form the challah in the shape of a key. Many people do both. When eating the shlisel challah, the idea is to remember that Hashem holds the key to all sustenance. Eating the key challah symbolizes one's hope that Hashem will turn the key and open the door to a wide abundance of sustenance. Now, tefillah for parnasa, probably that actually is over here. More than through a segula, tefillah prayer is the way the world is set up for us to receive everything we need and want, even when it is already decreed for us to get parnasa. The only way we can access it is asking Hashem to give it to us. While we are obligated, obviously, to do hishtadlut, to earn a living, it is our efforts that actually bring us income. Rather, it's coming straight from God. Our job is to put in the effort while acknowledging this truth. And by asking God to provide our sustenance, we demonstrate this belief of it. Tefillah for parnasah can be done with one's own words, simply asking Hashem to send livelihood that we need. I think there's no reason not to take advantage of prayer for parnasah, as I say, or in English. You can say it in English also. Hashem understands all languages, we have to point out. Saying Tehillim, Psalms, is a wonderful way to utilize the segula for prayer, for parnasa. In order to say Tehillim, one doesn't need to know what Tehillim to say for parnasa. One can say any Tehillim chapters and there will be a merit for the person. However, if one's looking for a job, for example, or looking for greater financial stability, the following Tehillim chapters, actually from the Rabbi Meir Balanes website, it will actually quote, being recommended as Psalm 23, 104, 128 and 145 over here. And there are also several tefillot that we say each day, which has extra power when it's said with a concentration as a parnasa prayer. One such tefillah is the bracha of Shomea Tefillah in the Shemona Esrei. He who listens to prayer, and the blessing that precedes Retzeh in the Shemona Esrei. And obviously having extra concentration while reciting this tefillah is a powerful merit that helps specifically in the area of parnasa. Similarly, having more concentration when reciting the blessing before and after eating is specifically a merit for livelihood. Any Jewish prayer for parnasa is really, let's say, an expression over here of belief of Hashem is the one who sends us livelihood. The words we say in prayer declare this belief, and they are said a few times a day, especially in Ashrei, in Psalm said 3 times a day through the day in the formal prayers. This is a verse mentioned, as we said before, Poteach et yadecha. Its meaning is that Hashem opens His hand and satisfies every living creature's desire, which is very, very interesting. Just as obviously there's a focus on the meaning of these words in Birkat HaMazon is a powerful segula, we must remember to focus on these words during the tefillah, the prayer, and it's also a great merit for parnasa over here, friends. So everyone, we did the Parshat HaMann together. It's a Tuesday over here. If you're tuning in live, welcome, and wishing you all well. Be'ez Hashem, we're all going to have a little shefa, abundance of wealth. We're going to have, and the most important thing, friends, over here is that we're going to have a blessing in all our money. Even if it's a little money, it's going to provide us a huge blessing in all our undertakings we're doing, and so on and so forth. And may anyone there's segulot for every single connotation over here. And if anyone is looking for children and you're taking on segulot, Be'ez Hashem, you're going to be fruitful and multiply ASAP, and just blessings for everyone. Wish you all fantastic day, and thanks for watching. Thank you.